या तो टेबल को पीछे ले.
So this typifies, right? Headquarters says congratulations on the success of our going green policy. So you've got green coming out of ears of people, right? So this whole discussion about greenery is about sustainability. So what exactly is this? What is why? What is right? Uska kya perspective hai? I think it'll be good to see, put it into context, right? I'll give you an example about my own society where I live. आप सब लोग, you live in a society, you live in a colony, सब लोग रहते हैं. So, we decided to move into this society where we were about 8-10 people living as of now, right now. अब होता क्या है कि 2-4 लोग आने लगे उस कॉलोनी के अंदर, सोसाइटी में. तो हमारी गाड़ी पार्क होती थी, सामने किसी और की गाड़ी पार्क होने लगी. तो फिर उसमें थोड़ा बहुत कॉम्प्लिकेशंस हुए, झगड़े शुरू हुए उसके अंदर. फिर यह था कि बड़ा अच्छा सा एक वहाँ पे क्लब है, और नाइस पीसफुल ग्रीन क्लब, सो पीपल गो अराउंड देयर. एक वीक पे क्या हुआ, वन वीकेंड सडनली जब सब लोग घर आए तो बहुत शोर, बहुत गाना बजाना, रात में 12-2 बजे तक के, पीपल कुड नॉट स्लीप. ये जो कॉन्सेप्ट है कि सब एवरीबडी आई एम श्योर इज विटनेसिंग दिस, कि होता क्या है कि व्हेन देयर इज इनफ रिसोर्सेज देन थिंग्स आर ग्रेट, राइट? इट्स अ ग्रेट गोइंग, एवरीबडी इज हैप्पी, वी आर ऑल फ्रेंड्स, राइट? बट जब रिसोर्सेज का कंस्ट्रेंट आना शुरू होता है, दैट इज व्हेन व्हाट हैपेंस इज के लोगों में कॉन्फ्लिक्ट आने शुरू होते हैं. दैट्स व्हेन यू रियली गेट इनटू कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स विद ईच अदर. दैट्स व्हेन सोसाइटी, गवर्नेंस, रूल्स, इसका सबका जेनेसिस जो है वो इससे ही है कि देयर आर कॉमन्स, देयर आर लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स, एंड दिस इज अ टर्म कॉल्ड ग्लोबल कॉमन्स. यू मस्ट रीड, देयर इज अ चैप्टर ऑन ग्लोबल कॉमन्स. तो कॉमन्स हैं विलेजेस के बाहर, अगर आप लोगों ने देखा होगा तो विलेजेस के बाहर कॉमन्स होते थे. वो लैंड सबकी थी और किसी की भी नहीं थी वो लैंड. वहाँ पे पेड़ है तो किसी को अगर कभी अपने गाय भैंसों के लिए कुछ चारा चाहिए तो उसने जाकर के उस पेड़ से ले लिया, राइट? किसी को लकड़ी चाहिए विंटर्स के अंदर जलाने के लिए तो उसने वहाँ से जाकर लकड़ी ले ली. वो सबके लिए थे. देन व्हाट हैपेंड ग्रेजुअली कि जब पॉपुलेशन बढ़ी तो उसी कॉमन्स के ऊपर कॉन्फ्लिक्ट आना शुरू हुआ. यही सेम कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ कॉमन्स इज नाउ into to the extent of global commons internationally. For example, space. Now, space itself is a global common. पहले तो ये था कि एक आध countries थी जिन्होंने satellite भेज दी, no problems, right? But now when every country is sending a satellite, then there's a huge complication. Who registers those satellites? Who owns those satellites? If that satellite falls and it falls on the head of someone, then who's responsible? The point is कि ये जो this whole thing that we get to know and get to hear कि COP26 हो रहा है, right? ये कन्वेंशन ऑन बायोडाइवर्सिटी हो रहा है, पेरिस में कॉन्फ्रेंस हो रही है. हम लोग का जो जनरल बिलीफ है वो ये है कि यार इट्स ऑल अ जम्बोरी, इट्स ऑल अ पार्टी गोइंग ऑन, एवरीबॉडी इज हैविंग अ ग्रेट टाइम, और होता हुआ था इसमें कुछ नहीं है, राइट? बट दैट इज एक्चुअली अ मिथ, दैट इज नॉट करेक्ट, राइट? सो टू बी एबल टू रेगुलेट द होल वर्ल्ड, जब तक के कम लोग थे, पॉपुलेशन, ग्लोबल पॉपुलेशन कम थी, तब तक देयर वाज नो प्रॉब्लम. आई थिंक अराउंड 70s 80s जब पॉपुलेशन, ग्लोबल पॉपुलेशन बिकेम अबाउट 6.5 बिलियन पीपल, दैट्स व्हेन देयर वाज दिस होल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट. वरना उससे पहले तो लेट्स से ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी, नाउ ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी वाज इनटू प्रॉफिट, इट वाज अ प्राइवेट कंपनी रनिंग प्रॉफिट्स. वो करते क्या थे कि वो मैनचेस्टर तो ग्रो कर रहा था, बट इंडिया के फॉरेस्ट जो थे वो खत्म हो रहे थे, राइट? So they had this 1927, the Indian Forest Act, the first act is 1927. It was all about protecting the interest of East India Company, the Britishers, because उस वक्त only thing was to how to lay taxation on timber, क्योंकि वर्ल्ड वॉर होने वाली थी या हो रही थी, उनको टिम्बर चाहिए था, ब्रिजेस बननी थी, कंस्ट्रक्शन होना था, शिप्स बनने थे, तो उनको टिम्बर चाहिए था, राइट? So there was a law, right, but it was meant to service a certain requirement. So to be able to remove these disparities, there is this whole thing about an agenda for the global legislation to be able to regulate this whole domain of sustainability. When the conflicts really started, that's when the world started thinking what to do, how to come together. So the first thing was in 1972, the Stockholm Conference. So Stockholm में conference हुई under the aegis of United Nations. जितने भी global environmental challenges थे उनको देखते हुए United Nations ने एक कॉन्फ्रेंस ऑर्गेनाइज करी. While it was a global conference, still it was a very, very limited agenda, which was a very Europe-centric agenda of how to handle acid rain and how to take care of regional pollution. So, and then this resulted in this whole establishment of United Nations Environment Program. So this was the first conference in 1972 in Stockholm. इसी conference के अंदर there were about 3 major outcomes of this conference. One was this resolution on what kind of financial structure, what kind of a governance structure कैसा होना चाहिए. Second thing was the principles. There were 26 principles थे. उसमें से 2 principles were related to removal of poverty, equality, many things there. उसमें से 2 principles हैं which have become very critical. One is principle 21, which is about sovereignty. The second one is about cooperation. Sovereignty means कि basically ये है कि every country has, or every state has a right to sort of exploit their own resources as per their own law, but to ensure that they don't hurt anybody else, not to hurt the neighboring country. or any other country for that matter. And the principle 22 is about while you do this and if you end up hurting, then you have to work together to find a way of mitigating that. किसी और country को अगर आप hurt करते हैं या किसी और individual को hurt करते हैं, then how do you solve it? Till 1972, it was all about environment. Environment को बचाना है, right? Environment को sustain karna, all that, right? It was up till here, and a lot of things started happening after this conference. There were a lot of agreements, treaties, a lot of things. For example, India's a lot of whatever India's legislation that you have on Environment Protection Act, on the, let's say, the Pollution Control Act, the Air and Water Pollution Control Act, is all an outcome of this. So during the next few years, this happened. In 20 years later, in 1992, this is where the Rio Declaration, this is where this whole United Nations Conference on Environment Development, which is also known as the Earth Summit. So ये हुई 1992 में, and this is where a lot of seminal, path-breaking work happened. Right? A lot of, for example, the Rio Declaration, the Agenda 21, Forestry Principles, legally binding principles like United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, the Convention on Biodiversity, all this happened at Rio. So यहाँ पे क्या हुआ? This is a big change globally, where people moved from discussing only sustainability to environment, sustenance and governance. This is the time when this whole thing about sustainable development starts. The regime of sustainable development starts from 1992, from the Rio Declaration. Till then it was all about environment. This is where people realize that look, you simply can't be looking at only environment. You can't ignore development. So development is extremely important. However, it has to be sustainable development. So this is where people start becoming very pragmatic, they start becoming practical, they start looking at development and how to sort of, put together a development agenda. So you see a movement to sustainable development. Here you also see a very interesting change, which is the global north versus global south. See, global north, primarily Europe, America, they are the ones who got developed first. They are the ones who have got high GDPs. So these were developed countries. So what happened was that they got a great run of development where they really massacred the environment, right? So the chlorofluorocarbons, anything, the carbon footprint, the CO2, the GHG emissions and all. So the global north did a fabulous job of development, really killed the environment. And now that you are developed, you start talking to South and telling them that, look, here is your problem and it is your problem, you've got to solve it, right? So this is, in these 20 years, the global South got together, understood that, look, it can't be this, right? You have to take responsibility for solving global South's problems. It is known as, let's say, pollution of luxury versus pollution of poverty. So the pollution of luxury is global north, where purely by consumption, they're creating pollution. So every time you buy a refrigerator, every time you buy a television, you are generating chlorofluorocarbons. And the global south is, you're talking about pollution of poverty, right? Which is consumption, population, right? Releasing of let's say, effluents and things like these. So global north, global south came together, and it was documented and it was made imperative as a part of various treaties and the governance framework that, look, industrialized countries have a responsibility and onus to green the environment, to extend financial support to the global south, transfer technology, skill building, all those things, right? So this is a seminal change where you find shift of global north also taking up responsibility for supporting global south. Sustainable development starts here, the agenda, and sustainable development is defined as development, that you do today without compromising on the needs of development of your future generation. So simple, but that is the agenda, and that's where, so this whole thing about ESG, right? The real thing is that when you see an ESG today, when you see a company declaring that I'll save so much of, let's say, water, or I'll start so much of green cover, what is really happening? There's a whole historical perspective. There is a governance mechanism. So there are international treaties. The countries that sign up for those treaties, they are under obligation to have their own legal framework and mandate the companies in the country to follow that. So say, for example, if there is a conference on, let's say, biodiversity, and if India is a signatory to that conference on biodiversity, then India, as a commitment to that, India has to set up Biodiversity Act, which is a very strong act in India. So there was a Biodiversity Act. And under the Biodiversity Act, there's a Biodiversity Commission, there's a Biodiversity Board, there are state boards, there's a whole governance mechanism, right? And I'm a company in India, and I also have, if I'm a multinational company like Pradeep Ji's company, then I also have a setup in US. Now what happens is that I need to follow this. I need to commit myself, because as India, we have committed. If I have said that, look, I will reduce my greenhouse gas under the Paris Agreement, if India has said that, then India has a mechanism to do that. And that mechanism has to get percolated down to every company in India, and every company in India has to sign up for this. Then only you are aligned to this. Then only India meets this target, and then only the world meets its target. This is the reason why you find companies today talking about ESG. This is a reason why today you find so much of discussion around that. You find so much of financing coming into that. So there's a very strong business, reason, not because as a company I want to do it, but I have to do it. I am committed, my country is committed, my state is committed, my company in another country is committed. Now it's a sort of very networked global world, right? So this part, I find it a very, very insightful article in 1960. इतना पुराना आर्टिकल है. थियोडोर लेविट करके हैं जो कि he was a professor of marketing in Harvard. तो HBR का आर्टिकल है ये. So I have given you the backdrop, right? Now I'm trying to move it to link it to business, right? That's what the whole objective is. So businesses will do better in the end if they concentrate on meeting customers' needs rather than on selling products, right? This is the beginning of customer centricity, right? As a concept. With this article, you move from selling to marketing, right? होता क्या है कि selling and marketing terms हैं बहुत loosely use होते हैं, right? People use marketing as a term very, very loosely to include selling. अगर किसी को selling कहते हैं यार ये तो marketing कर रहा है. Selling is what? Suppose I'm a car salesperson. मैं कार की कंपनी हूँ. मेरी एक सेल्स टीम है. उसका काम क्या है कि वो कार जो बन रही है, मेरे पास कार की इन्वेंट्री है. मुझे अपने डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर से, डीलर से बात करनी है भाई तुम्हारा क्या फोरकास्ट है, कितना है, और एक प्रोजेक्शन देना है. वो कार बनेगी, फिर कार मुझे जो है बेस्ट पॉसिबल प्राइस पे, बेस्ट पॉसिबल टर्म्स पे बेचनी है. तो मैं अपने डीलर के पास जाऊंगा, उससे कहूँगा अच्छा भाई तुम्हें कितनी चाहिए. वो बैठ के नेगोशिएशन होगा. वो कहेगा नहीं क्या भाव, मैं कहूँगा ये प्राइस है. वो कहेगा नहीं ये प्राइस है. फिर मैं कहूँगा अच्छा ये क्वांटिटी, मैं कहूँगा तुम्हें स्कीम चाहिए, अभी दिवाली है, न्यू ईयर है, तो उस पर तुम्हें स्कीम मिलेगी, राइट, और तुम्हारा पेमेंट टाइम पे देना. सो दिस इट्स अ वेरी ट्रांजैक्शनल थिंग कि ये प्रोडक्ट है, ये बेचना है, इसको बेचना है, ऐसे करना है, राइट. मार्केटिंग इज अबाउट taking consumer insights, understanding as to what is it that the consumer needs, right? What are those latent needs that the consumer is at times not able to express? और उन consumer needs को understand करके putting them into a product and then putting that product together, putting the promotion together, putting the branding together, taking customer feedback, seeing what competition is up to. So marketing is a very, very large realm of many, many things, right? And that marketing gives cover to sales to go and sell. Marketing generates pull. This is where we start seeing the shift from people being able to distinguish sales and marketing, and after that a lot of work was done by Porter and many other sort of management gurus. But the fact is that companies have policies, very clear policies, and we'll move on to that. I'll take another brief pause here to understand if anyone has got any observation, any question. ये जो पूरा जो governance का discussion हुआ, right, various Rio, Stockholm, various thing, all this. So finally all this sort of narrows down into 17 Sustainable Development Goals, right, जो कि United Nations के हैं, right. These are those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. इसके अंदर पहला है No Poverty, second है Zero Hunger, third है Good Health and Well-being. So these have become like a go-to. They have become like a benchmark, a sort of reference point for any organization, anybody to sort of link their goals to. So I'm just taking two cases here. One is Apple and Foxconn. Apple has, what they have done is they have published. I've just taken a couple of slides here, right? So उनका goal number one is end poverty in all its forms everywhere. Goal number two, end hunger. जब ये end poverty in all its वो है, तो वो क्या कर रहे हैं? Apple supporting initiatives, supply standards relating to minimum wages and benefits. They're mandating the suppliers to go for minimum wages and benefits. Goal 3, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages, right? उसमें वो कह रहे हैं कि environmental health and safety practices at Apple and its suppliers facilities. Energy, very critical. यहाँ पे कह रहे हैं supplier energy efficiency program. So Apple is publishing goals, very specific, very clear goals, right? Foxconn, the largest supplier to Apple, based out of Taiwan, large facilities in China till now, coming to India, already in India in a big way. Now look at this. Environment, sustainability, very clear. What do they mean by this? What do they mean by this? Linkage to these goals of United Nations, organized Foxconn scholarship program, and I'll be preferred as a supplier compared to my competition, right? Because I am helping my customer achieve what they have published, right? I'm helping my customer win with their stakeholders. Very clearly linkage, businesses making sense, profitability being driven by linking to ESG, not because I'm in love with ESG, but it makes business sense. I'll be a preferred supplier if I score high on my customers' so ESG goals. So GAP's sustainability report, ESG report. If you see here, they're talking about water. Amongst many things, I've just taken up one part, right? So my dream and goal is to provide clean water to those who don't have access to it. Their goal, 100% washable denim. Washable denim is a denim program that they were running, which saves 20% water. So they're saying compared to conventional wash methods, GAP's washable program uses at least 20% less water. Since 2018, the brand has saved approximately 500 million liters of water. So we saw this and we were working with them very closely. So we said, how do I engage a gap, right? How do I market myself to gap, right? We as a company were drawing almost about 8 to 9 million liters of water every day from the ground. 80 lakh meter पानी आप रोज ground से ले रहे हैं, right? What are you up to, right? And people are dying of, not dying of thirst, but I mean, what is the problem? So we said that, we should stop doing this fresh groundwater stuff. So what we did was that we approached the Gujarat Municipal Corporation. वो जितना sewage होता था वहाँ का सारा sewage would go into municipal corporation's drains and then it will get treated, not treated, what knows. So we approached the municipal corporation. We said, you have a problem. You have this sewage coming out of these large colony societies. Why don't you give this to us? आप ही हमको दीजिए. And what we'll do is that we'll put together a sewage treatment plant. So we partnered and they gave us this sewage. We agreed and then we put together a sewage treatment plant, a world-class sewage treatment plant. ऐसा हमने plan करा. पहले हमने अपना paper plan करा. We went to gap. Because there was a cost involved, right? The power of this idea was it was amazing, right? Gap ने एक बड़ा ambitious goal, they कहते हैं BHAG, big hairy audacious goal, right? वो उन्होंने publish करा था कि हम 10 billion liters of water save करेंगे. It was a really ambitious goal. And again, Gap, when they published this goal, it made a big difference to Gap's image with the stakeholders because they were not really known as a large, very sustainable company. So when we read about this goal, because we were seeing the investor presentations, we were seeing the guidance to the street, so we approached them. We said कि भाई ऐसा है, आपका ये goal published है, आप हमारे साथ काम करते हैं, you know our credibility, right? We work with you. Now we have this great opportunity where we can stop drawing this water, and we set this up. Would you be keen? They were very happy. They jumped at it. They said yeah. So they partnered with us on that. They financed it. Municipal corporation ने हमको पानी दिया, right? उसको हमने वहाँ treat करना शुरू करा. वो treat करके and we stopped drawing groundwater, right? और हमने ये sewage water treat करके we started using it for our process and then sort of doing the effluent treatment and getting it out. So this whole thing about customer centricity, this whole thing about and this is like in the marketing domain, right? It's not in sales domain. So sales तो automatically हो रही थी. भाई आपने अगर उनके साथ tie up कर लिया, right? उन्होंने आपके अंदर invest कर, so your customer has become your investor. Your customer has become your partner. You don't have to sell. There's so much of pull. They mandated all the teams कि भाई आप उनसे खरीदो, हमने इनका ये करा हुआ है, and this is the right place to buy. It is ethically right. It makes sense. It is de-risked. All that, right? You have these senior leadership from Gap saying this is